The structure is really what sets apart the Enneagram from other typologies, I would say. So it's broken down as a circle with 9 points, which is the Enneagram, 9 face drawing, right? It's broken into 3 triads, and those are the 3, instinctual centers.
Yeah, and when studying kind of the history of it, it's interesting that some people think that the 9 points and the 3 centers were always there. And others think that we kind of came along later, especially in like the 1970s, and started putting some like pop psychology over it.
Yeah, Oscar Pichazzo and Claudio Naranjo and Gurdjieff from
how does he
the
remember
1900s.
things? I'm like those guys. And he's like, yeah. And that kind of makes it a struggle for me a little bit to lean in, which makes sense to my personality, because I'm thinking like, well, I need to know how it was in its original pure form.
Yeah, it seems a little wishy-washy.
When you start and if you listen to different schools of thought, it almost is like they describe numbers very differently. In fact, I've texted Cam so many times and been like, I hate the Enneagram now because I'm so confused. But my personality needs it to match, so I understand.
Well, I feel like the traits, like they describe the traits differently, but the underlying motivators are still the same.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. But I'm still like, it needs to all make the same sense. Like this needs to work perfectly. But it doesn't.
So the triads are, heart, which is 2, 3, and 4, which is, they're usually other referencing.
I think emotions.
Emotions, they're feeling. Most of the time, it's actually based on other people's emotions and not their own. 5, 6, and 7 is the head type. So they get stuck like categorizing and analyzing. And that's also, they're fear-based type. So 2s, 3s, and 4s deal generally with a sense of shame because it's like they're not living up to others' expectations of themselves. And then 8s, 9s, and 1s are the body, the instinctual types.
The gut, yeah.
Which kind of makes sense with your facial expressions that we often see, that gut reaction.
I make facial expressions. What?
You do.
Yeah, actually, I've always done that, and I thought it was because my mom taught me to. I think there's something in that, but also I heard someone say that 1s are the most expressive because they can't block their reaction.
Yeah, it takes them a second to not. It's an instinctual response that has, and then especially for 1s, it's an instinctual response that then gets tamped down once it's like, hey, I can't be doing this. This
not allowed to make that face.
So it just rushes across the face, and then it's gone, but the mask comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So with the triads, like 8s, 9s, and 1s, they all deal with anger. 8s, 9s, and 1s all deal with anger in different ways. Like 8s are typically more, I'm going to use my anger to control my environment and protect my vulnerabilities. So they come off as very powerful. They see themselves as invulnerable. 9s kind of fall asleep to it. They call them the mediators.
Peacemaker.
Yeah, the peacemakers. So they're very... they end up merging with other people more so they don't even know. They fall asleep to their own wants and needs and kind of just, they're great in groups because they'll just do whatever everybody else is doing. And 1s try to repress their anger.
Or reform it or fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so 2s, 3s, and 4s, 2s are...
the helper.
The helper. So...
Yeah, and I hate, the reason I think it's important, the reason the numbers exist is because it was meant to help you to not label them. And what's hard is that even in talking about them, we're ending up labeling them. So I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this a lot too, is like, it's a character, we're using like characteristics of type to make almost a caricature, but those caricatures exist as almost like tells in poker. Like, it gives you a sense of the underlying motivation, which is the more important thing. Yeah,
and so it's not as fair to say like, oh, 4s are all creative and 2s are all really sweet and 9s are all... peacemakers or lazy or whatever. I mean, you get in when you start taking some of those quizzes or you start diving in a little bit, it starts to get into some simplistic generalizations, which I think are okay because it kind of nudges you in a certain direction. But I think the work really to be done is to dig into all the deeper stuff. You have to look at behaviors and motivators.
There's subtext to the characteristics. And so like for 2s, they are helpful. They're super, it's one of the most like, you would call it like the female type. It's the helping mother. Nurturing mother. But there's an underlying level, like their root sin is pride, which you wouldn't expect. You wouldn't expect for 2s, is that pride. But it's this, I'm going to make myself when they're unhealthy, I'm going to make myself indispensable for you because the only way I can get love is conditional and the only way I can get it is to give it. So it's really sad. And that's what I've noticed. My wife's a 2. My wife's a 2. And it's like, you can see it happening. Like they don't see that love can be freely given. And so, and that's one thing with all the types
we
is
need to be needed.
Yeah, you need to be needed. That's what Roar's like chapters subtext is you need to be needed. 3s need to be seen as successful. And 4s need to have that feeling of uniqueness.
Yeah.
5s need to have knowledge and they need to build this, like, they get stuck in data. And 6s need a security structure. 7s need positive experiences so they can hide from that fear that we talked about with the triads. So, but it's that underlying sense, because we'll get into probably into the individual characteristics later when we go into each type.
Yeah.
But it's really easy to just, people use it as a parlor trick and get stuck in the characterizations and they're like, oh, you're such a 5.
Yeah.
Or they use it as an excuse. Like,
I can't help it. I'm an 8.
It's a BuzzFeed quiz. Like, which Stranger Thing character are you?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm 11. It's whatever it is. But that defeats the purpose of the Enneagram, because the Enneagram tells you where you trip up. And that's where a lot of people stop with it. They're like, I'm such a 6. That's why I'm anxious all the time. Yeah. Instead of realizing that, okay, now you know your type. Now it's time to realize that you're not just your type and to move beyond that and actually move into health from that. It gives you a tool for spiritual transformation, basically.
Yeah, very spiritual tool.